Hello, everyone, and welcome to 3 Secrets of Agile Leaders. My name is Peter Stevens. I'd like to thank you for coming. It's a great honor to be invited back to Krakow. This is my third trip, and every time I remember what a lovely place this is. Before we get started, what I'd like to do is let's get to know each other. Who is in the room? So can we keep the lights up for just a second, and so we can kind of see the answers? Lights going once. Is anybody still there? Okay, is anyone controlling the lights? They're running on automatic. Okay, so, maybe what you do is you kind of shine a light on yourself with your phone so we can see the answers. Any chance of getting the light back? Is that a yes or a no? No. Okay, so I'm going to have to ask you to shine a light on yourself, and then if you are a developer, okay, so if you're actually someone who creates stuff, hold up your light, let's see those lights shine in the dark. Okay, so I'm trying to see some hands and some lights, and now we can start waving back and forth like in a rock concert, okay? How many of you consider yourself to be an Agile developer? Okay, so that means you've thought about like the Agile Manifesto and you've kind of liked the values and principles of it. Okay, so that looks good. How many of you have never heard of the Agile Manifesto? It's good we're all in the dark here. Okay, how many of you consider yourself to be anti-Agile? You say, my God, my management keeps telling me to do this Agile stuff and I wish they'd just let me do some work. Okay, it's okay, we can still be friends. Okay, how many of you are some kind of Scrum leader? You know, like a Scrum Master, an Agile coach, or a product owner? Okay, so we got a pretty diverse group here. Anyone here a manager? You know, anyone want to admit to that? Team leader? Okay, number of managers. Any top-level managers? C-suite? Okay, I see 2 lights, 3 lights. Okay, great. You know, this is actually, I think, one of the secrets of Agile leadership is taking an interest in what's happening where the rubber meets the road, where the value is actually produced. And finally, is there anyone who I've missed? Anyone who didn't get a chance to hold up their hand, maybe shout out? Okay, I don't see any lights waving, so okay, good. So, as I say, my name is Peter Stevens. My day job is I'm a Scrum trainer. To me, that means I teach hope, or I hope to inspire hope. I teach people to do Scrum, but what I really try to do is share that, the spirit of agility, okay, and try to share that passion so other people will want to do that. If you look at this picture, you'll see a couple of interesting waypoints along my career. I started my career at this little company called Microsoft. You might have heard of them. They've gotten a little bit bigger in the meantime. I've done work mostly on the Unix side. I made my career working on Sun Microsystems on what I now call my first Agile project back in 1993. And it was a lot of fun, and the work that we did laid the basis for my career for the next 10 years. After that, Microsoft came back and pretty much destroyed the Unix workstation market. And so I kind of had to reinvent myself, and it took me a while to find it. But I ended up rediscovering myself around Scrum. Finally, a way of organizing people that made sense. And let's see, so what else? I've been a full-time Scrum trainer since 2012. Something maybe a little bit surprising about me is that little airplane. I used to be an active private pilot, and I flew that plane across the Atlantic, that is from North America to Europe twice. So let's talk a bit about what does it mean to be agile, okay? And I think the term agile and agility was really coined by the Agile Manifesto. Yes, it's a word in the English language, which is kind of interesting because we can define it to mean almost anything we want. But there's a set of values and principles and a whole movement that was called into life by the Agile Manifesto. The first response to that is what I'm going to call fake agile. And so when you hear people saying, oh, there are developers who really hate agile, I think what they're really talking about is this fake agility, which is imposed top-down. And what we're starting to see emerge is what I'll call a collaborative agile, where both the top and the bottom of an organization are working with each other, collaboratively, speaking to each other as adults. And these are based around Steve Denning's 3 laws of agility, which I'll explain in a moment. So a lot of people, and especially if you're not coming from this community, they might be forgiven to think that agility is mostly about buzzwords, most of which I don't understand, like Scrum and Kanban and what is all this stuff and story points, and it all sounds a little bit like mumbo jumbo. And all of these practices, did emerge, with the possible exception of SAFe, all of these practices did emerge, in inspiration or around the values and principles of the Agile Manifesto, but just these practices don't make us agile. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to take a deeper look at the Agile Manifesto. That's, if you will, the philosophical statement. Most people talk about the 4 value pairs at the beginning, like individuals and interactions over processes and tools. And by the way, those values are kind of rejecting the values and principles that are the basis of modern management, which might explain some of the tension between agilists and more classical company leadership. So let's take a closer look at what is really key in the agility. And I find that you get them from the first sentences. The first sentence of the manifesto itself, and the first sentence, the first principle of the 12 principles. We are uncovering better ways of developing software by doing it and helping others to do the same. Our highest priority is to satisfy the customer through early and frequent deliver of valuable software. So what do we find in these values and principles? Well, I find 3 things. The first thing I find is learning. There is no best practice. There's only the search for a better practice. We find collaboration, doing it and helping others to do the same. And finally, we find purpose, which in this case is very tightly related to the customer. Okay, so if I were going to sum up what is agility really about, I would start with these 3 words: learning, collaboration, and purpose. Now, kind of an interesting question is, do you want to aspire to be agile? And I'm not going to try to answer that question for you, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to suggest a couple of steps where you can try it on for size and say, is this something that would work for me? And the other thing you can do is invite your colleagues, even your management, to try it on for size and see what comes out, okay? First thing is, do you remember your best project? Okay, one where everybody, the whole group was working together, collaborating together. You felt all for one, one for all. Well, think about that project and think about the story of that project. What made it a great project? Okay, and then go through the Agile values and principles. Okay, the 4 values, the 12 principles. Go through them one at a time, and think about how did that great project, how did that map to the values and principles? Were you building it around motivated individuals? Or were you building it around people who didn't care? And usually what you'll find, I think if you look at most of them, if you try them on for size, I think you'll find that following that value or principle was a good thing. If you didn't follow it, you probably wish you had. But every once in a while, one of those values and principles proved to be really challenging. And that's something that might be something you need to learn how to do. Okay? But I believe that once people understand what agility is about, and this has been my experience in classes and workshops, I've been doing this approach for about 2 years now, most people, when they find out what agility is about, they want to be there. Now, agility, these agile approaches, they have an advantage: they work. So what happens? Sooner or later, agility meets the leadership of the organization, and what happens? Well, this is where we get what's known as fake agility. Okay, and fake agility is we have, learning, collaboration, and purpose, and our stakeholders say, this doesn't interest me. This is not my problem. This is down, this is 3 decks below my watch. Why should I care? And this makes it very difficult because, agility is about recognizing problems, okay, and reacting to those problems. And who is it who, is best positioned to, make changes in the organization? Well, it's the people at the top of the organization. The other problem which comes is pretty much the opposite approach. Okay, we call it, this is the top-down agility. This is someone up at the top says, oh, great, agility, yes, let's be agile. And starting next week, we got all these millions of practices, and we're going to do all of them, and we're going to do the best practice, and we'll be agile, and that will be great, right? Well, it doesn't quite work that way, because as soon as you tell someone to do something, they got 3 reasons why they don't want to do it. And that's just something natural about, how humanity works. This approach actually provokes a lot of resistance. Now, one of the big debates going on right now is SAFe really, how many of you guys are doing SAFe, by the way? Let's see those waving hands. Anyone doing SAFe? Okay. Is SAFe agile? Okay, and what's unique about SAFe is SAFe is the first approach that's really been sold to management rather than grown bottom up from the developers. And when I talk to organizations, especially organizations that say SAFe has been good for us, what they say is the problem with SAFe isn't that it's got bad practices. The problem is it's got too many practices. And so what you need to do is pick a small subset that you're going to do, and those will probably be very helpful for you. So anyway, so let's go on. What's kind of the synthesis of these 2 approaches, the top-down approach and the bottom-up approach? And Steve Denning, with his Learning Consortium, has been looking at companies that have been trying to be agile at a strategic level. And what he came up with were 3 things. First thing is the law of the customer. Okay, and I notice this when I talk to executives. The top executive is usually really focused on the customer and the customer needs. Okay, now Steve would take this a step further and say it's not just about satisfying existing customers, it's about finding new customers. Okay, so you have to be able to innovate, sometimes even at the cost of your existing customers. The next is the law of the network. Information needs to flow freely through the organization, so that when an issue arises, be that a problem or an opportunity, it can get to someone who can act on that information, and that person will act quickly and intelligently on that information. And actually, if the network isn't functioning properly, it's like a brain that has a stroke. It's getting information, but it can't process it, and the organization doesn't make good decisions. And in fact, my own belief from my practice is this is actually the place to start, is to make sure that the information is flowing freely in the organization. And finally, we have the law of the small teams. We see this over and over. Anything up to about 10 people is pretty good. Anything beyond 10 people, and things just slow down. Okay, so for Steve, agility is the law of the network, okay? Communication, the law of the customer, which is the basis, the most important of everything, and finally the law of small teams. And it turns out that his 3 laws and the 3 basic principles of the Agile Manifesto look pretty aligned. And in fact, when I talk to executives, what I find, when I say, what are your pain points? What are the problems? What are the things you need to fix in your organization? Most of them can be mapped pretty neatly to one of the 3 laws of agility. Now, the agility, remember I said it works? Well, it's been filtering up, and I would say since about 3 years now, agility has been on the radar screens of our top management. Okay, it made the cover of the Harvard Business Review. I think this was in 2016, and it also, was recently featured in the Wall Street Journal. So yes, your top leaders are reading about this. This is leading to kind of, the best of times, the worst of times. Never has it been easier to talk to leaders about agility, but there's all the risks and side effects of having your top management talking about agility before they've really understood it. So what I'd like to do now, I told you I was going to share 3 secrets, okay? And these are the actual experiences of leaders in 3 different situations, and how their leadership skills have helped them move forward either personally or in business. And so I've got them here. You probably thought I was going to tell you them, didn't you? Okay, I suppose I will, but we're going to build the suspense here and do it one at a time. So the first one I would like to suggest is that change is easy if you want to do it. A lot of people are saying, no, change is really hard, you can't do it. Resistance, is you try to change a system and it resists. Well, this is true, and if you want to do it, it's at least possible, and my experience is it can happen overnight. So let me tell you of a story, a personal story, about how I mastered a personal challenge and how this connects to getting things done. Starting about a year and a half ago, I lost 10 kilos. And I was noticing that my belly was kind of filling out my shirt. And it's interesting because the problem of losing weight is a bit strange because most agile stuff is, we make some tickets, waiting, working, in progress and done, and we move the tickets from left to right. But losing weight is about things that we don't do, or maybe things that we're going to do, but we do them differently. And so how do you represent that in Agile? And the short answer is I'm not sure that you do. But one of the things I discovered, a colleague of mine spoke to me about this and says, how do you feel when you've had too much sugar? We talked about the high and then the crash afterwards. And I said, oh yeah, that's interesting. And then about 2 days later, I don't know, I had a couple of chocolate croissants for breakfast, and I noticed the high and I noticed the crash. And I said, I don't like that. I don't like what sugar does to me, and so I want to avoid sugar and carbohydrates. Okay, and then a funny thing happened. For me, going to breakfast at a hotel, I travel a lot, so I eat a lot in hotels. And I would go to the pastry counter, and it's like a vegetarian going to the meat counter. I'd say, look at that, and say, whoop, not for me. Go on to the next section. And that enabled me to change my eating habits, and most of the kilos just melted away. So what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to imagine for the moment you're the captain of a ship. Okay? Not in the 21st century where we've got GPS calculating, down to the microsecond when you're going to arrive and how far you are off course. But let's go back 50 or 100 years where we don't have electronic navigation. How did you navigate back then? Well, first thing is you say, where am I going? And then you calculate your course. And then, over the course of the voyage, you had to look at the stars, look at what time it is, and on the basis of those things, you could figure out where you are. So in this case, we're going from Portugal to Jamaica. For me, the destination is always Jamaica. And don't know why Jamaica, but it seems like a nice, sunny, be happy sort of place. So you set course for Jamaica. Okay, so you're sailing to Jamaica. Now, is the ocean an easy place? By the way, is life an easy place? No, it's not. There are all sorts of distractions. They're the winds, they're the currents, they're the waves. They're trying to blow you off course. And when the sky is covered with clouds, you can't even see the stars. When the waves are crashing over the railing, you might not even have time to point the rudder in the right direction. So what happens during the storm? Well, you get blown off course. Okay? And so let me tell you about getting blown off course. This was me at Christmas time. And for some reason, I'm originally from the US. All of my relatives decided what Peter needs for Christmas is chocolate. Okay? And the quote from on the slide is absolutely correct. These are good. These are really good. I got about 3 kilos of these things. Maybe only 2, but a lot. And you know what happened? It took me 2 months, but I did my duty, and I ate all of them. What happened to my weight curve? Well, it started going in the other direction. And in fact, I was saying, gee, I've been eating a lot of sugar, and boy, that sugar is good. I like that sugar. Oh, wait a minute. This is not taking me to Jamaica. Okay? Do I want to go to Jamaica? And I said, well, yes, I do, and I still don't like how sugar makes me feel. And so this is realizing, hey guys, I'm off course, but I want to get back on course. Okay? And so, this is like the fundamental question, where do you want to go? And as soon as you realize where you want to go, well, now you can set course to get there. Okay? So my tip to you is, it's your boat, you're the captain of the boat, you get to decide where it's going. Okay? And by the way, be nice to yourself, because, even if you're in a storm, the boat didn't sink, and that's a good thing. Okay? So give yourself a pat on the back, and every once in a while you say, am I on course? Okay, no, where do I want to go? Turn right, set your course back to your Jamaica, and you'll be fine. So the first secret, change is easy if you want to do it. It's a matter of, the key word here is want, and everything, once you want it, then everything else falls into place. So let's take a look at the next secret. What really matters? If you're clear on what really matters, then it's very easy to communicate what you're trying to achieve. Other people can agree with that. Once they agree with that, it's much easier to discuss what to do and how to do it moving forward. This year was the 50th anniversary of the moon landing on Apollo 11. For me as an American or a born American, it actually is nice to be able to remember there was a time when it was possible to be proud of what's happening on the other side of the Atlantic. And the Apollo program was an amazing program. It was like a military mobilization, except for peaceful purposes. They had a total of 400,000 people working on the moon project. Okay? Now, how do you create alignment among those 400,000 people? And by the way, in 1961, no one even knew if we could go to the moon. So how do we get there? Well, John Kennedy, the president, was really good with the vision thing. And basically, every single member of the Apollo crew, of the Apollo program, all the way down to the manufacturers, knew 3 things about Apollo. Point number 1, we are going to the moon. Point number 2, it's not going to fail because of me. Okay? So that told everybody everything they needed to know about what is the mission and how do they have to behave. It's not going to fail because of me. And that motivated people to, do amazing things to make the moon landing happen. Now, there's one last thing. What happens if something goes wrong? Okay? Well, if you're going to build rocket ships, unplanned disassemblies and hard landings are kind of part of the game. So if something goes wrong, remember rule number 1. We're going to the moon. Now, some of you are looking at me and say, but I'm not going to the moon. So let me give you a much more concrete example about this. This was a gentleman who I coached last fall who had taken over a small company that made specialty hardware for hobby aviation. And he entered the company with the goal of saving the company. And he realized, well, that what really matters question is kind of an interesting one. So let's talk about, how do you do things that matter? The first thing you need to do is you need to actually be able to do stuff. Okay, now some of this is about keeping track of your list of things to do, checking them off as you go through. There's some basic skills here, and obviously, there's the actual thing. You need to be able to do that. So the first thing is doing work. The second thing is setting priorities. Okay, am I working on something that matters? Now this kind of begs the question, what really matters? You have to be, if you don't know what really matters, then, well, you could work on anything and it doesn't matter, right? And if your definition of what really matters changes every 2 weeks, well, that's kind of an interesting problem as well. So the third thing you need to do is you need to be able to challenge yourself. Okay? Am I working according to priority? Have I set the right priority? Okay? And this, by the way, I think is the most difficult thing. If we look at Scrum, Scrum basically has the same concept. How many of you guys are doing Scrum? Anyone out there doing Scrum? Trying to do Scrum? Trying to do Scrum. Okay. Give yourself a pat on the back. Okay? You'll be better at it next sprint. Okay? So, Scrum defines a role for each of these aspects. Okay? And so, the team solves the problem, the product owner sets the priorities, and the Scrum Master is like the voice of common sense. By the way, is your Scrum Master the voice of common sense? Yes, no, maybe? If the answer is more towards no than to yes, then we probably need to have a conversation afterwards. The Scrum Master is helping the other 2 roles and the rest of the organization collaborate effectively. Well, for you, it's just, you and yourself. I think of, body, head, and heart. Your body, your hands do the work. Your head sets the priorities. And your heart is there to remind you to be nice to yourself. Now, we can actually, or you can actually apply all of the principles of Scrum to your own life. Okay? But instead of having the vision be some sort of value for the customer, the vision is what really matters to you. Okay? And so then you can think of your life much like, much like Scrum. And in personal agility, we call this the priorities map. So the first question is what really matters? This is how you navigate. This is how you decide what it is you want to be working on and what you're going to postpone to next week or maybe to not at all. And on the basis of that, you can make decisions about what to do, what you're going to focus your energy on. Okay? And so this is really the key question. Okay? And one of the things is this is not necessarily an easy question to answer. But sometimes just looking at how you're spending your time and how you're planning to spend your time will give you insight about what matters. And if you notice there's a difference between how you spend your time, how you want to spend your time, and how you are spending your time, well, this gives you new insight into what matters, which you can use like for navigation. Oh, I didn't tell you Jörg's story, did I? So let me tell you Jörg's story. Come back here. Yes. Okay. So Jörg came to me and he says, I got too much to do. I want to save my company. Help me make get this in order. And so what we did is we walked through these questions. He created his priorities map, had a list of 7 things that were important to him. And I said, which one of these, you said you wanted to save your company. I don't see it on your map. And so he wrote down a ticket and he said, save my company, and made it his top priority. And then he went home, went back into real life. Took him about a week to actually get to the point where he could look at his priorities map, started doing it for a week. He came back, second session, week later, total of 2 weeks later, and we talked about it and we got some understanding of what really mattered. And he was still a little kind of not really sure what was going on. Anyway, at the end of the session, he walks out, and I didn't find out about this until 2 weeks later, because just as he was walking out the door, he had this aha moment. Yes, I want to save my company, and I want to have a decent life. Okay? I want to sleep nights. I want to, take the day off on the weekends and stuff like that. And so he went home and he told his wife about it. And she says, Friday night, by the way. And she says, oh, you want to have a decent life. So what does that mean? And he says, well, how about we go see a movie tonight? And her reaction was, this is like the first time in 9 months that you've suggested that we do something together. Okay? So they went out to see a movie last night, and over the course of the next 2 weeks, he starts rethinking, well, how am I going to spend my time? Do I really want to work 80 hours a week? No, I don't. So I've got to rethink how we're going to do this. Okay? And this letting go of what he thought really mattered, figuring out what really did matter, that enabled him to actually take the steps that were necessary to save his company. So my advice to you, this clarity can be transformational. Once you figure out what really matters, especially if what really matters changes, communicate it right away. The people around you will notice it immediately. So, it's time for the third secret. This is the good one. How many of you are software developers? Okay? Of some kind. This includes testing, this includes design, this is, everybody who makes this stuff happen. Well, this is the third secret. This is what your leadership hasn't discovered. You guys have solved their biggest problem. Okay? Their biggest problem is that they got too much to do, and they don't know how to get stuff done. So, I'd like to share the story of Walter Stulzer, who had exactly this problem. Okay? Walter was the head, or is the head, of a small creative consultancy based in Zurich. And so basically, about 2.5 years ago, his company was part of a much larger company, and the partners decided that they wanted to go in separate directions, and so he took his share of the company with him, and what came out of that was FutureWorks. And he wanted, he was getting to an age where he thought, I don't want to be the one pushing the cart all the time. I want there to be a next generation, and I want there to be a company that's worth taking over afterwards. And so he kind of took a classical approach to it. They said, okay, where do we want to be? Okay, set the goal. What are the things we have to do to get there? And they defined, 25 or 30 things that they thought, if we do these things, then the company is going to be, self-sustaining and self-sufficient, and, I can check out and, do other interesting things. And then they went to work on it. Oh, by the way, they reserved 10%. Now, this is a consulting company, so they charge people by the hour, and it's a small consulting company, which means that if any work that they don't do for customers costs them revenue. Okay, so even their top leadership is active with the customers. And they said for the top 10 people in the company, we're going to reserve 10% of our capacity for improving the organization. And they set to work on 30 different things. Okay, and 2 years went by. Okay, and after 2 years, how many of the goals do you think that they had achieved? Good, correct answer, 0, not one of them, okay? And this is the point where I got involved and started talking about agility. And so what happened? Well, the point of departure is the same. The goals for the company are the same. The objective of, or the constraint that they can devote 10% of their capacity. They gave themselves 2 years to do it like they did the first time around, 10% of their capacity, except this time, the whole leadership team had learned how to do Scrum, and they were doing what I'll call a very lightweight version of Scrum. Now notice, 10 people working 10% is one full-time equivalent. That's not a classic Scrum team, but they were still working in sprints, and they always said when we work on something in the sprint, we work at least as a pair. Okay, so what happened? Whoosh. Okay, by the way, that was to scale. Okay, 2 years to 6 months. After 6 months, how many of the goals do you think they'd achieved? Okay, the short answer was all of them. Now, the other thing which is to scale is the number of measures that they actually did. So notice, instead of trying to do everything at once, they're doing 2 or 3 at a time. And they only needed to implement half of the measures that they had defined in order to achieve the goals. And so as Walter put it, he says, well, everything we needed to accomplish, we'd achieved, we'd made our initial goals within 6 months. Half of the initial ideas proved unnecessary, so they didn't have to do them. Okay? Now, maybe you've heard Jeff Sutherland say, twice the work in half the time. No, all the goals, half the work, a quarter of the time is how it played out for him. And he was already, after 6 months, he was able to see the improvement in the finances. Okay? Remember the leadership guys, they want to talk about money? Well, having stuff in the finances is quite helpful. So how do they do it? Well, from Walter's perspective, the first thing he did was he committed to making it a success. Okay? I told him, telling your team to go do Scrum doesn't work very well. You've got to be involved and committed as well. He changed his communication style. Instead of talking about what to do, we started talking about why we do it. Remember what really matters? This is the answer. This is the formulation of the answer to the why question. Okay? They applied Scrum. And then every 3 weeks they got together. They had concrete goals for the 3 weeks. Every 3 weeks they reviewed their progress. What's done? What do we want to do moving forward? So, what is the problem that we were solving here? So how many of you can relate to this picture? Too much to do, not enough time to do it? Well, you see, this is the problem that we all have. Anyone seen the film Ants? Film Ants? It's an old Woody Allen, it's probably about 20 years old now. And Woody Allen's character is, he's a worker ant. And he's gone to the psychiatrist. And he says to the psychiatrist, "Shrink, I feel worthless. I'm small. I'm meaningless. All I do is run around in circles." And the shrink says to him, "Woody, you're an ant. You are small. You are meaningless. You're just an ant in this huge colony." And he looked at it and he walked away, kind of not somehow confirmed, but not really happy. So, at the same time, the truth is we do have too much to do. And the interesting question isn't, are we going to be able to do everything, but how are we going to spend our time? Okay? Now, some of the stuff that we can do, and this was like Walter's case, some of the stuff we can do is going to make a difference. It's going to earn value for the company, it's going to make us happier, and some of that is just waste. Now, our classic approach is to try to do everything at once. Okay? But that has the effect of slowing us to a crawl, and it means that we're doing things that matter and we're doing things that don't matter, and everything takes longer. Okay? So what we would really like to do is take our capacity and focus it on the things that matter. Okay? And this is what having impact is all about. Now, I said developers have the secret. So let me ask you a question. These are kind of the basic practices of Scrum. Okay, and most other agile frameworks, and in Kanban, these get called cadences. How many of you guys are doing most of these practices? Okay, hold up your hand if you're doing most of these practices, okay, to manage your own work. Okay, now, how many of your leaders are doing these practices to manage their work? That is, how many of your leaders do sprint planning for the organization, they do a daily Scrum? How many of them? Okay, I do not see any hands. I might see one hand. Okay, and if we look at these practices, this is from the version 1 State of Agile. Okay, we see that these practices among developers are extremely widespread. Okay, and what they really help us do is they help us to focus, they help us to collaborate, they help us to learn effectively. Okay, and management, leadership, even though they have an equally complex task of running the organization, they generally don't do these things. Okay, I asked Walter, in fact, but before I made this presentation, I asked Walter, I just want to make sure I've dotted my I's and crossed my T's. How many of these things is your team doing? And he said, all of them. Okay, all of them. So what's happening? Well, let's look at that. Let's review that multitasking thing again. This is you working on one thing at a time. Okay, so standardized task takes you a week to do. What happens if you're working on 5 of them at once? Okay, everything slows to a crawl. Okay, and I believe, we talk about transaction costs and switching costs and things like that. I believe when we're multitasking, we introduce a new task, which is hugely difficult, and that's deciding what to do next. Okay, and if you believe the research on this, if you're doing 5 things at once, it takes you 20 weeks to do what you could have done in 1 week. Okay, 5 things, you would have had it done in about a month, and it extends it out to about 6 months as a rough. So my belief is that there's a huge potential to improve management, the efficiency of organizations, by applying the same practices that development teams are using today to the challenge of leadership. So the third secret is to apply agility to leadership. My suggestion is start with yourself. So take a quick look. So these are the 3 tips. First of all, change is easy if you want to do it. Create clarity on what really matters. And finally, apply agility, the practices of agility, to the leadership of your organization. Okay, so would you like to be like Walter? Would you like to be the next FutureWorks? Well, basically my approach, if you came to me and asked me how to do it, I would say start with the personal. Okay, as a leader, it can be a little bit scary to try something new because you've got colleagues who may or may not be supportive if you fail or if you make a mistake at the beginning. So start with yourself with personal agility. The next thing to do is to say, how do we make the organization more efficient? This is about getting the law of the network, getting that communication going inside the company. This is starting that, even if it's a very, very lightweight Scrum team, just doing just doing the improvements in the company. Get that going in your management so you start applying the practices of agility within the leadership context. Whether your teams are doing Scrum or Agile is a completely separate question. You might do them, you might not, but if you do have Agile teams, well, make sure that they're able to get stuff done every sprint. First goal is to get one team that's working pretty well with Scrum. And the next thing to do is to connect that team with the leadership. Remember the law of the network? If these guys have a problem, if as a developer you have a problem, as a leader you need to give them the support that they need. Okay? And only when you've got that working for the first team, then you can start to stretch it out for the remaining teams. Anyway, I believe that these things work best if they spread virally. People showing stuff that works for them, and let them, let the other people, the guy next to you, figure out that that's a good thing. If you'd like to learn more about this, I write a lot about this in my book on personal agility. You can download it for free from my website. I got a couple of copies here. I have a couple more copies of my 10 contracts. If you want to get a copy, physical copy, your business card gets the book. And for that, I say thank you very much. It's an honor to be here, and the timer says we have a couple minutes for questions.